I would say that it's a new challenge every time. But if we could always go back to the foundations of things like wanting to make this work, wanting to keep our promise, and wanting to make our marriage thrive, that has been a lot of the reason that pushed us forward.
Hello and welcome to the Connect to Marriage podcast. I'm Jo and I'm your host for this episode. In each episode of the Connect to podcast, we will be tackling questions that couples ask about marriage, communication, conflict management, finances, and so much more. We hope you will keep tuning in to learn with us as you grow closer, deeper, and stronger in your marriage. Now today, in our very fast-paced, high-stress world we live in, it seems really easy to say I do at the altar, only to have us retract on our promise to our spouse when the going gets tough. We're going to explore a topic that's very foundational to marriage, yet often overlooked: lifelong commitment. I know that almost sounds like a taboo word or phrase, but in marriage, lifelong commitment is said to be the glue that holds us steady through life's ups and downs. But when everything around us changes so fast, how do we stay devoted for the long haul? So today we have Marcus and Si Lin in the studio with us. They've been married for 8 years. Marcus is a digital transformation expert, or your tech guy. Yeah, and Si Lin works in a very different arena altogether. She's a clinical psychologist by profession. And they are parents to 3 children. And I must say that I've known Marcus even before he got married, I believe. Yeah. Yes, even before he got married, much less had children. And today I was just really pleasantly surprised to have bumped into his eldest child who is going to primary school. So time really, really flies. And I think they belong in the age group where they are encountering, really the question about whether lifelong commitment still holds in marriage today. So welcome to the Connect 2 podcast, Marcus and Si Lin. Tell us a fun fact about yourselves.
Hi Jo, good to be here. Fun fact about myself, I personally own, I think, more than 500 board games. So I really love board games over video games because personally I think face-to-face interaction is something that shouldn't be neglected, and really spending time with people, having fun and having laughs together.
And you had these 500 board games before you got married?
It's a growing collection.
And you're still married. That's great. Okay, that's why we're here to talk about lifelong commitment and how that still happens. And Si Lin, something about yourself.
I think more for myself and Marcus is that our height difference is about 28 cm different. 28.
I'm the tall one.
Yeah, you're the tall one.
I'm not the shorter one.
Yeah. And another fun fact is that the first reason why I had a crush on Marcus was because of his height.
Yes.
Okay, we should find out a little bit more about that too, whether, the height difference of a long ruler will make a difference in marriage. Okay, and so let's jump into it. Marcus and Si Lin are both busy working parents, and you have young kids. And I'm sure, in your life stage with your peers, you probably know people, couples who are at the stage of, getting divorced, have divorced perhaps, unfortunately, or maybe contemplating divorce, because it's said actually, even in Singapore, that the highest divorce rates are between the 5th and the 10th year of marriage, and you guys are in your 8th year. I mean, can you comment on what's happening, especially in our Singapore society or Asian society?
I think from the friends in our circles, we do see that the length of marriage beyond 5 years is actually a time where there might be certain tensions or certain struggles that actually in the first few years you can still sweep it under the rug and just close one eye, and those things can still be left unresolved. But beyond 5 years actually is starting to amount to quite something significant. And that's where people might start to question and say, wait, do I really want this for the rest of my life? When I said my marriage vows on the wedding day, I didn't really expect this heap of unresolved things.
Yeah. That's true. As a marriage solemnizer myself, I usually, tell couples that I've never met any couple who gets married with the intention to get divorced, right? And, much as even on a wedding day, we talk about commitment, and it seems already a tough decision of the will to make, in front of, everybody, all your witnesses, and declaring it on such an auspicious occasion. But it's the day to day, right? And as you said, it builds up. So what would lifelong commitment look like on a day-to-day basis for both of you, running a very busy household with, equally active kids?
I think lifelong commitment really is taking active steps to make the marriage thrive. And I think there are two words that I would like to just highlight, which is consistency and intentionality. So it really requires us to constantly seek to know each other, to love each other in a way that the other desires. So an example would be Marcus' love language is actually acts of service. So that's his second love language. And that doesn't really come naturally to me. But during his birthday, it's really taking the intentional effort to maybe cook for him or doing something that he values, which I might find it a bit of a struggle. But I think, again, back to the idea of really wanting to put him above sometimes my own preference. And I think the second thing is also to work through differences when we do have one. So creating a safe space. And we mean, when we think about that, it's really on both ends. One is to really create the safe space to respond to someone's vulnerability, the other person's vulnerability, and even really to dare to be vulnerable in front of the other person. So, for example, for myself, I'm somebody who in the past would clam up a lot and I would disengage. So whenever we have a disagreement and I'm getting very emotional, it's almost like a snap of the finger, my emotions just shut off. So he would sit there and then he'll stare blankly and go like, what just happened? Because I might be crying on the first minute and then the next minute I'm like, okay, let's stop this conversation and I'll check out. But I think what helped a lot was how Marcus responded by just initially staying there, being in the same space with me. He doesn't insist, he doesn't pressure me to continue this difficult conversation. But I think even for myself, it's also to learn to be open to taking emotional risk, to then share or stay in touch with my emotions and to slowly let him in. So that has been what I mean by maybe creating a safe space for each other.
Did you imagine that it would be like that when you said your vows, for better, for worse, like till death do us part, that it's in these very little things actually that happens ever so often, but you need to, like you said, Si Lin, actually be very intentional, right? And not just intentional, but consistently doing it. I think as human beings, we have trouble with being consistent. I mean, we all have our bad days. We have days when we decide that it's not so easy to be intentional anymore. I mean, if you could think, it's been 8 years, but would this be what you imagine it will look like, in terms of lifelong commitment in marriage?
I think for myself, I actually come from a family where both my parents were each other's first. So first boyfriend, first girlfriend. And to them, they were in it for the long haul. So to me, that was my context. And so when I was exploring marriage, that was what I had in mind, that it had to be lifelong. So even in response to the question of what does lifelong commitment look like, to me, it really means to keep your promise. I mean, more Asian men will be like, oh, must be a man of your word, right? It's really to keep that promise. The vows that I said, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, to death us to part. I think it's really how do I live that out. That involves the day-to-day decisions. Though it's lifelong, it takes every single step to reach that place of a lifelong commitment. And that intentionality to make that happen, you can't just expect the other person to make the vow happen. But there is my part to play, and how do I actively seek to love and to cherish and to make the marriage work.
So I would assume Si Lin's your first.
Yes.
Phew, okay. But I mean, what will you tell like couples who don't actually, have that kind of background or context? I mean, I say this because my husband himself, I think we shared in an earlier podcast that he came from a family of divorce where there were many, many divorces amongst his extended family. And so I think commitment was his one really bugbear. And the whole concept of it, I think he would think that he's a man of his word. And because he was a man of his word, so because he felt that, I might not be able to keep the commitment, so maybe I should postpone marriage, right? I mean, there's also that part of it where maybe that's why we're experiencing also these days fewer and fewer people actually wanting to tie the knot. So, I mean, how would you tell someone who's not actually had that advantage or the edge to witness what lifelong commitment looks like in a relationship, and now wanting to get into one, like, I don't know, what's the first thing they need to know?
So I think what would help a person in that situation is really to first dream of what is the kind of marriage that you would like, and then to commit to making that happen. And another point would be actually to surround yourself with couples that you actually look up to. So even if you might not come from a family that has a marriage that you would envision for yourself, you can actually look at others around you. And I think I've heard of an example before where there's this person who came from a broken family, but then he joined a group whereby he was meeting with older men in their marriages, and he actually witnessed the way the married couples interacted with each other, and he said, that's something that I want. And that was something that then he crafted for himself and he pursued. So I think that really kind of helps bridge the gap between not seeing a marriage that you want to envision for yourself and actually kind of putting yourself in that place to be in a community.
Yeah, that's true. That's a good one. So if today any of our listeners out there want to befriend Marcus and Si Lin, please let us know. They'll be a good couple to hang around with. Has this whole thing about and all the effort needed to have lifelong commitment in your marriage become easier or harder when the kids come along?
The early years of marriage are filled with unique challenges and opportunities for growth. What happens after saying I do? At the Connect to Just Married workshop, you will gain practical tools to work through differences and conflicts and learn ways to keep the romance alive. If you have been married for 5 years or less, this workshop is for you. Get more information at www.family.org.sg/C2JustMarried.
Definitely has been a lot tougher. I think just to go back to the question you asked previously, when we say the marriage vows, do we imagine it to be like that? Yes, but not to this intensity for me, at least. Yeah. And when things get really, really tough with children especially, sometimes all these things are tested. So all your foundations are tested. So I think for us, it was a particularly challenging time during our firstborn, when she was actually born. She was a premature baby. So at that point in time, you're already high stress, trying to work out with the transition. But I think it was particularly difficult when other relatives were involved. So say my in-laws were involved, and everybody has their own opinion when it came to things like parenting. So it was challenging during those times because I might be really frustrated with the way that certain people might be saying, or maybe my in-laws might have an opinion on, and I'll be going to Marcus and ranting. And I remember there was once where I was just constantly just ranting, and he kept very quiet. And then one day he turned to me and he said, do you know it's really difficult to hear you share this about my parents consistently? And I think that kind of clicked within me to know that, oh yeah, I forgot to consider him. I forgot to consider him, especially in this time where it's not that I'm going through challenge alone, but he himself is also going through a period of transition and challenge as well. So I think that was something that was particularly difficult. But I think as time passed, as we both grew, it's also constantly figuring out. I would say that it's a new challenge every time. But if we could always go back to the foundations of things like wanting to make this work, wanting to keep our promise, and wanting to make our marriage thrive, that has been a lot of the reason that pushed us forward.
To Si Lin's benefit, it's not that she's a complaint queen and complaining to me about very minute things. I think it's very real struggles. I understand that she's just gave birth, she's going through hormones and all that. So on my end, I was also thinking, I should, as a good husband, I should let her rant. I should be her sounding board, I should listen to her. But then that weight of it upon me also it was too much to bear. And also that was when I just feedback to her that, yeah, it's hard for me to have to be between her and my parents.
So what do you do in such a situation? I'm sure people would like to know, especially Asian men, Asian husbands.
It's really important to have that open communication. Just me being able to feedback to her openly about it, not in an accusatory way to say that, can you stop complaining? Because I actually don't want her to stop coming to me and to being that outlet, to be a listening ear for her. But yet, I hope that we can kind of do it in a way that is conducive for both of us, or is a win-win. In times for us, we have found that if I were to reach an outcome or a solution that I feel benefits me, but if it's something that is detrimental to her, then actually that's the zero-sum game. The relationship or the marriage didn't benefit from this outcome. So it's really to seek a, not really win-win, because it's not that we both win, but as a whole, we both come out better. So when we have open communication, it's for her to consider my needs as well, but also that I also let her know that I want to continue to support you and to hear from you. So please don't stop.
That's really insightful, because I think sometimes we feel that if I truly love my spouse, then, let's not burden him or her further, right? But in this case, a burden shared is almost like a burden halved.
Right.
What would you tell a newlywed or a couple who's going to be wed? What advice would you give them about establishing a marriage built on a foundation that can last a lifetime?
I think really just going back to what I was saying about safe space, to constantly create this safe space for each other, to constantly take emotional risks in allowing the other person into your inner world and your emotions. It's really very scary, but it is also very beneficial in the sense that you then, like what you said, share the same burden. You share, it's not your problem, it's not your difficulty, it's really together, let's grow. And I think it's always figuring out, even till today, 8 years in, we're still figuring how to communicate, or figuring how to apologize to one another. I think recently, just about a month ago, we had an argument, and it was along the lines of how it started over a small event, a misunderstanding. Both of us had different perspective, but it kind of exploded because of the way that I apologized, which was not really what Marcus was looking for. So that really required me to humble myself, to figure out, think through, okay, stand in his shoes in order to learn how to better communicate, better apologize, to meet his needs. So I think to newlyweds is always that constant learning. It's a learning journey, and constantly being willing also to learn from the other person, and not always insisting that, my way is the best way.
I think my advice would be, don't use the D word. To extent of that is really, if you foresee or in your speech, your actions, in your decisions or in your mind, you are thinking that it will not last, then that kind of informs your actions, your words, and that is not helpful. But if I communicate or I believe in a lifelong marriage, actually that should inform the decisions that I make. Because it's like a lifelong commitment is actually a lifelong investment, and it will bring lifelong returns. It's actually very safe, because when two people promise one another and they do their best, they act on it to build this lifelong commitment, then that is the investment that they put in. For example, if I were to rent a room, I might not invest huge amounts of money to have a built-in cabinet, because I know that it might be temporal, or I'm unsure how long I'll be here.
Yeah.
Whereas if I bought a home, I know I'm going to stay here for the long haul, then I can go all in. And I think when you actually go all in, you communicate to the other party that this is for the long haul. And then you kind of build upon one another to give your best, do your all. You ride on one another's vibe.
True. And that assures that safe space that you were talking about earlier, right, Si Lin?
Right.
It sounds like, if we have that D word, or the divorce, right, the word divorce in our vocabulary, and we play that card, it's almost like going to battle with already the mindset that you're going to lose.
Right.
Yeah, so I like this whole idea of being all in. If to share one goal or objective of marriage, it would be that we are all in and for the long haul, right? We usually address a frequently asked question that couples have about relationships in every podcast, and we do have a question for today. And today's question is this: I'm increasingly feeling like my husband isn't the same person I married. In the beginning, we shared many dreams, many plans. We were partners in every sense. But over time, it feels like we've drifted into different worlds, each caught up in our own routines and expectations. Conversations that used to flow so naturally now feel heavy, often ending in misunderstanding or silence. Is this a sign that we've lost something essential in our relationship that can't be recovered? Should I keep trying to bridge the gap, or is it that I need to accept that we may have grown apart in ways I hadn't anticipated?
I think it's natural as we grow older and it coincides with many of the transitions that we would definitely be different from the time when we got married and we actually said our vows. But I don't think that at the end of the day it's a lost cause. I think it's always a way to then start with maybe small consistent efforts to reconnect, to find ways to love each other once again. Thinking about this question, the immediately think about is remembering the vows, remembering where you started, and remembering that, hey, we had a plan together. So like what Marcus said, really remembering that you are all in. And because you are all in, then that is the foundation in which you might want to seek out ways to reconnect with each other, whether it is through hobbies, whether it is just to have that one meal in a month together, but starting small to romance each other once again.
Yeah, I think building on that is really almost thinking back into the dating phase when a guy chases a girl. Even if you don't have any common interests, you will make common interests. You will find like, oh, you're taking this train home. Even if I don't stay nearby, I would take that train home also. So building that common places, creating places where your worlds collide, I think that's something that we can intentionally do if we are in a situation like that. And I mean, we are 8 years in, not sure whether we will allow or will ever have this drift. But I think for us also that to keep close quarters. One way to not allow drift is that we keep each other in each other's world. We update one another, we involve each other in key decisions of our lives so as to not drift apart. So I think that's something that we can build in to our relationship, and that will kind of safeguard us, keeping that close ranks.
When you said the word drift, I was reminded of how we, use in organizations the term mission drift, and that if it happens or we see it happening, we go all out to avoid it, right? And to use countermeasures to make sure we get back on track. And I hope that, the listener who asked this question will feel that it's not like what Si Lin, you said, right? It's not a lost cause. There's always a way to get back on track, a way to rediscover each other, a way to rebuild shared goals and shared dreams. However, if you are in a place that's similar to the question that was posed today, do know that Focus on the Family does offer counseling. And if you do need some extra outsider objective inputs into your marriage, do always feel free to contact Focus on the Family. Before I end off, Marcus and Si Lin, is there any last word you want to, share with couples out there, whether they are newly married long time, about commitment?
I think I can understand that it is lifelong commitment, big words put together, and it might be daunting or invoke fear in individuals. But I think when two come together as one unit, it's a beautiful union. And it's really endeavor worth giving your all for. So I would really encourage people to, or married couples or newlyweds or people who are considering marriage, to really give it a go. One way to elevate the fear is to really look at others around you who have a thriving marriage, who you can envision something that you want to have, and really to connect with them, to ask them for tips and to even get them to mentor you. I think that will really help build a marriage that lasts a lifetime.
Thank you so much, Marcus, Si Lin, for sharing your lives with us today. I think you've inspired a lot of hope in us. Definitely inspired and challenged our listeners, I'm sure, to go all in, to really give it our all. And I think with that mindset, there's really nothing that can deter us from enjoying that kind of thriving relationship in a lifelong marriage. Well, in each podcast, we usually end off with a couple challenge for our couples to do and share with each other. So if today you're listening to this with your spouse, do maybe share with each other how you rate your level of commitment in marriage today as compared to maybe when you were first married. And not just to rate it so that you can judge one another, but what is one thing perhaps today that you've heard that you can put into practice to increase that level of commitment in your marriage? If you didn't get a chance to listen to this with your spouse, well, you can always re-listen to this podcast at any time and then talk about the couple challenge together. We hope you found today's episode helpful. Don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and share this podcast with a friend who might also benefit from it. Thank you for tuning in, and remember to take care of yourself and your spouse.